I refused to pay my gambling addict dad's debts, so he showed up at my mom's house drunk. Now he's in jail, and my aunt says I'm ruining his life. I'm James, 28M, and I've been dealing with a complicated situation involving my dad, Tom, 52M. Our relationship has always been strained due to his gambling addiction, which has been a part of his life for as long as I can remember. Growing up, I watched my mom, Sarah, 50F, struggle to keep our family afloat while my dad frittered away money at casinos and racetracks. She worked 2 jobs, as a teacher during the day and a waitress on weekends, just to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my dad would disappear for days at a time, only to return broke and full of empty promises to do better. I remember one particular incident when I was 10. It was my birthday, and my mom had saved up for months to buy me a new bike. I was so excited when I saw the wrapped box in our living room, but before I could open it, my dad stumbled in, clearly drunk and agitated. He started arguing with my mom about needing money for some debt. When she refused, he grabbed the box with my gift and stormed out. I never saw that bike again, and my dad didn't come home for a week after that. Things came to a head when I was 12. My mom discovered that my dad had taken out a second mortgage on our house without her knowledge to cover his gambling debts. That was the last straw for her. She filed for divorce, and we moved out of our family home into a small apartment across town. After the divorce, I lived primarily with my mom, but spent every other weekend with my dad. He seemed to try harder during those visits, taking me to baseball games and teaching me how to fish. I remember one weekend when we went camping in the mountains. We sat by the campfire, and he told me stories about his own childhood. For a moment, it felt like we had a normal father-son relationship, but there were always signs that his addiction was still present. Sometimes he'd disappear for hours at the casino while I was visiting, leaving me alone in his small, dingy apartment. I'd sit there, watching TV and wondering if he'd come back this time. Other times, he'd be so broke that we'd end up eating ramen noodles for every meal during my stay. As I got older, the visits became less frequent. By the time I was in high school, I only saw him a handful of times a year. He'd often cancel plans last minute, and I suspected it was because he was either gambling or broke from gambling losses. I remember one Christmas when he promised to take me skiing. I waited all day for him to show up, but he never did. Later, I found out he'd lost all his money at a poker game the night before. Despite the rocky relationship, I still cared about my dad and wanted him in my life. When I graduated college and got my first real job as a software engineer at a startup, I was excited to share the news with him. He seemed genuinely proud, and for a while, our relationship improved. We'd grab dinner every few weeks, and he'd ask about my work and dating life. He even helped me move into my first apartment, spending a whole weekend painting and assembling furniture with me. Things were going well until about 6 months ago. My dad called me out of the blue, sounding panicked. He said he owed some dangerous people $5,000 and needed my help. He claimed he'd borrowed money for a sure-thing investment, but it had fallen through. Against my better judgment, I agreed to loan him the money if he promised to get help for his addiction. He swore up and down that he would, so I transferred him the cash. A month later, he was back asking for another $3,000. This time, he said it was to pay off some old medical bills that had gone to collections. I was skeptical, but he sounded so desperate that I reluctantly gave it to him after he claimed he was almost done paying off his debts. But then 2 weeks ago, he called again asking for $10,000. He said the loan sharks he owed money to were threatening him, and he needed the cash immediately. He spun a story about how they had shown up at his workplace and threatened to break his legs if he didn't pay up soon. I lost it. I told him I wasn't going to enable his addiction anymore, and that he needed to figure it out on his own. I reminded him of all the times he'd promised to get help and never followed through. He got angry and said I was abandoning him when he needed me most. He brought up all the times he was there for me as a kid, the camping trips, the baseball games, teaching me to fish. He said I owed him for raising me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded him that he was barely around and that Mom did most of the work. I brought up all the birthdays and holidays he'd missed, the times he'd left me alone while he gambled, the constant broken promises. I told him that whatever good memories we had were overshadowed by years of disappointment and neglect. The argument escalated, with both of us saying hurtful things. He accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, saying I'd forgotten where I came from now that I had a good job. I fired back that I'd worked hard for everything I had, no thanks to him. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and ended up hanging up on him. I thought that would be the end of it. but I was wrong. He started showing up at my apartment unannounced. The first time, I let him in against my better judgment. He begged me for money again, saying the loan sharks were going to hurt him if he didn't pay. When I refused, he got belligerent. He started, knocking things over and yelling so loud that my neighbors came to check if everything was okay. I had to threaten to call the cops to get him to leave. He's come by 2 more times since then. The last time, my girlfriend, Megan, 26F, was over. We've been dating for about a year, and while she knew about my dad's addiction, she'd never seen this side of him before. She answered the door, not knowing who he was. He tried to convince her to let him in, claiming there was a family emergency. He told her I was in trouble and needed his help urgently. Luckily, she texted me first and I told her not to let him in. After that incident, Megan sat me down for a serious talk. She was concerned about my safety and well-being. She pointed out that my dad's behavior was escalating and that he might become dangerous if left unchecked. She suggested I consider getting a restraining order, but I wasn't ready to take that step yet. I feel awful for cutting my dad off, but I don't know what else to do. He's refused to get help for his addiction, and I can't keep bailing him out. Every time I give him money, I'm just feeding his addiction. But at the same time, I worry about what might happen to him if I don't help. What if the loan sharks really do hurt him? My mom thinks I'm doing the right thing. She says she wishes she'd set firmer boundaries with him years ago. But some other family members, like my Aunt Lisa, my dad's sister, say I'm being cruel. They think I should help him because he's family, regardless of his faults. I'm torn between my love for my dad and the need to protect myself. I want to believe he can change, but I've been disappointed so many times before. I don't know if I can take another round of broken promises and manipulation. AITA for refusing to help my dad and cutting contact? Should I give him one more chance? Or am I right to protect myself even if it means potentially leaving him in a dangerous situation? Edit. Thank you all for the responses and support. To clarify a few things, yes, I've tried to get my dad into treatment before. I've offered to pay for rehab multiple times over the years, but he always refused. And no, I don't plan on giving him any more money. I know it would just enable his addiction further. Update 1. It's been about 2 weeks since my original post, and unfortunately, things have only gotten worse with my dad. He's escalated his attempts to contact me and get money, pushing me closer to my breaking point. Last week, he somehow got hold of my work email address. I suspect he might have sweet-talked the information out of a well-meaning receptionist at my company. He started sending me long, rambling messages. Most of them were guilt. Trips about how I was turning my back on family and forgetting where I came from. But a few contained vague threats, saying I'd regret it if I didn't help him out. One particularly disturbing email hinted that he knew my daily routines and could make things difficult for me if I continued to ignore him. I was shaken by these messages. I forwarded them to our IT department, and they blocked his address, but the damage was already done. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, worried that he might show up at my workplace. My productivity took a hit as I struggled to focus on my tasks, jumping every time my phone buzzed or someone knocked on my office door. Then this past weekend, he crossed another line. He showed up at my mom's house. I wasn't there, but my mom called me in a panic. Apparently, he was drunk and belligerent, demanding to know where I was. When my mom refused to tell him, he started yelling and pounding on the door so hard she thought he might break it down. She ended up having to call the police to remove him from the property. I felt awful that my mom had to deal with that because of me. She assured me it wasn't my fault, but I still feel guilty. Growing up, she always tried to shield me from the worst of my dad's behavior. I remember countless nights when she'd send me to my room while she dealt with his drunken rages. Now it feels like I've failed to protect her, like I've let the cycle of abuse continue. The incident at my mom's house was the last straw for me. After talking it over with Megan and my mom, I decided to file for a restraining order against my dad. The hearing is set for next week. Part of me feels like I'm betraying him by taking legal action. I keep thinking about the good times we had, the fishing trips, the baseball games, the proud look on his face when I graduated college. But then I remind myself of all the times he let me down or put his addiction first. It's hard to reconcile the kind, fun dad I occasionally had with the desperate addict he's become. I keep wondering if there was something more I could have done to help him over the years. Maybe if I'd pushed harder for him to get treatment when I was younger, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. But then I remember all the times I did try to help, only to be rebuffed or taken advantage of. I've also been dealing with a lot of anger. Anger at my dad for putting us through this. Anger at myself for not setting boundaries sooner. Anger at the world for dealing my family such a crappy hand. There are moments when I want to scream, to break things, to let out all the pent-up frustration and hurt. My girlfriend Megan has been incredibly supportive through all of this. She's offered to come with me to the restraining order hearing for morale support. I'm grateful to have her in my corner, but I worry that all this drama might be too much for her. We've only been together for a year, and this certainly isn't what she signed up for when we started dating. I'm also considering joining a support group for family members of addicts. A coworker who went through something similar with his brother recommended one that meets weekly near me. I'm hoping it might help me process some of these complicated feelings I'm dealing with. Maybe talking to others who've been in my shoes will help me feel less alone in all this. For now, I'm just taking things day by day. I'm trying to focus on work and maintain some sense of normalcy in my life. But it's hard not to constantly worry about what my dad might do next or if he's okay. Despite everything, a part of me still cares about him and hopes he'll get help someday. I find myself replaying memories from my childhood, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong. Was there a moment when I could have intervened? A time when I could have said or done something that would have changed the course of events? I know it's not productive to dwell on these thoughts, but I can't seem to shake them. The restraining order hearing is looming, and I'm a bundle of nerves. What if the judge doesn't grant it? What if my dad shows up and makes a scene? What if this pushes him over the edge and he does something drastic? The what-ifs are driving me crazy. I'm trying to stay strong, but some days it feels like too much. I'm tired of being the responsible one, tired of having to parent my own parent. Sometimes I just want to run away from it all, to start fresh somewhere where no one knows me or my family's troubled history. But I know that's not the answer. I have to face this head on, no matter how difficult it may be. Update 2. Another couple of weeks have passed, and there have been some major developments with my dad's situation. The restraining order was granted, which brought me some peace of mind initially. But that feeling didn't last long. Just days after the order was issued, my dad violated it by showing up at my apartment again. This time, he was completely wasted and caused a huge scene in the hallway, screaming and pounding on my door. My neighbors called the police and he was arrested. I felt terrible seeing him hauled away in handcuffs, but I knew it was necessary. The officers told me he'd likely face jail time for violating the restraining order. Part of me hoped that some time behind bars might be the wake-up call he needed to finally get help. But then I got an unexpected call from my Aunt Lisa, my dad's sister. She laid into me for getting my dad arrested, saying I was ruining his life. Apparently, he'd called her from jail, spinning some story about how I was trying to destroy him. Lisa said I should be ashamed for abandoning family and that I needed to drop the charges immediately. I was stunned. Lisa and I had always been close when I was growing up. She was like a second mom to me after my parents divorced. When I was in high school, I used to spend summers at her place. We'd go on road trips, and she'd tell me stories about my dad when he was younger, before the gambling took over. She was always the one who tried to mediate between my dad and me, encouraging us to mend our relationship. Hearing her take my dad's side and berate me was crushing. I tried to explain the full situation, but she wouldn't listen. She just kept saying I was being selfish and cruel. She brought up all the times my dad had been there for me, conveniently forgetting all the times he'd let me down. The call with Lisa really shook me up. It made me start doubting myself again, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Maybe I was being too harsh on my dad. Maybe I should give him another chance. After all, he was still my father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who cheered the loudest at my little league games, who helped me build my first computer. I found myself tempted to call the police station and tell them I wanted to drop the charges. But before I could, Megan stepped in. She reminded me of all the reasons I'd gotten the restraining order in the first place. She pointed out how my dad had repeatedly violated my boundaries and put me, and now my mom, in danger. Megan's pep talk helped snap me out of it. I realized Lisa was probably just reacting to whatever sob story my dad had told her. She didn't know the full extent of what had been happening. I decided to stand firm on pressing charges. I'm still wrestling with guilt over my dad being in jail, but I'm trying to remind myself that his actions are what put him there, not me. I didn't force him to violate the restraining order or harass me for money. Those were his choices. For now, I'm focusing on healing and moving forward. I've started attending that support group for families of addicts. It's been really helpful to talk to others who understand what I'm going through. Hearing their stories makes me realize I'm not alone in this struggle. I'm also considering starting therapy to work through some of my childhood issues related to my dad's addiction. There's a lot of unresolved anger and hurt that I need to deal with. Maybe talking to a professional will help me process everything that's happened and find a way to move forward. Megan and I are planning a weekend getaway next month to decompress from all the stress. We're thinking of going to a cabin in the mountains, somewhere quiet where we can hike and just be away from everything for a while. I'm looking forward to some time away to clear my head. Work has been a welcome distraction through all of this. I've thrown myself into a new project, working long hours to keep my mind occupied. My boss has been understanding about the situation, giving me some flexibility with my schedule for court appearances and support group meetings. I still haven't heard anything more from Lisa since that phone call. Part of me wants to reach out and try to explain things to her again, but another part feels like it's not worth the effort. If she's not willing to listen to my side of the story, maybe it's best to just let that relationship go for now. As for my dad, I don't know what's going to happen when he gets out of jail. Will he finally realize he needs help? Or will he just go back to his old ways? I'm trying not to get my hopes up, but a small part of me can't help but wish for a happy ending to all of this. Update 3. It's been about a month since my last update. My dad ended up serving 2 weeks in jail for violating the restraining order. He was released last week and thankfully hasn't tried to contact me again so far. I did get an unexpected email from him a few days ago. It wasn't asking for money or making excuses this time. Instead, it was a lengthy apology for his behavior. He said the time in jail made him realize he'd hit rock bottom and needed to make changes. According to the email, he's enrolled himself in an intensive outpatient program for gambling addiction. He's also attending daily GA meetings. He said he understands why I got the restraining order and that he'll respect my boundaries going forward. Part of me wants to believe he's sincere this time. I remember when I was about 15, he had a similar moment of clarity after losing his job due to gambling. He went to a few GA meetings and stayed clean for almost 6 months. During that time, we actually started rebuilding our relationship. We'd go to the movies every weekend and he even started teaching me how to play guitar. But then he relapsed hard, pawning my guitar for gambling money, and things went downhill fast, so I'm cautiously optimistic at best. I've heard similar promises from him before, only to be let down again. I replied thanking him for the apology, but said I needed more time and space before considering any kind of reconciliation. On a more positive note, things have improved with my Aunt Lisa. After my dad got out of jail, she called me to apologize for her reaction. Apparently, she'd done some digging and found out the full story of what had been going on. She felt awful for jumping to conclusions and siding with my dad initially. Lisa and I had a long talk about everything that's happened over the past few months. It was good to clear the air with her. She shared some stories about my dad's struggles with gambling when they were younger, which helped me understand the depth of his addiction a bit better. She's always been an important part of my life, and I'm glad we were able to make amends. The support group I've been attending has continued to be really helpful. Hearing other people's stories of dealing with addicted family members has made me feel less alone in all of this. It's also given me some useful coping strategies for managing my anxiety around the situation. Megan and I went on that weekend getaway we'd planned. We rented a small cabin in the mountains with no cell service or internet. It was exactly what I needed, a chance to relax and not think about family drama for a few days. We hiked, cooked meals together, and spent evenings stargazing. It reminded me that there's more to life than just dealing with my dad's problems. We're talking about moving in together soon, which I'm excited about. Megan's lease is up in a couple of months, and we've been looking at apartments. It feels like a big step, especially with all the family drama going on, but I think it's the right move for us. Work has been going well. I got a promotion last week, which was a nice boost after all the stress I've been dealing with. My boss pulled me aside and told me he was impressed with how I've managed to stay focused despite my personal issues. For now, I'm just taking things one day at a time. I'm proud of myself for standing my ground and setting boundaries with my dad, even though it was incredibly difficult. I don't know what the future holds for our relationship, but I feel stronger and better equipped to handle whatever comes next. I still have moments of doubt and guilt, especially late at night when I can't sleep. I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm being too harsh. But then I remind myself of all the pain and stress his addiction has caused over the years. I know I need to prioritize my own well-being, even if that means keeping my distance from him for now. I'm trying to focus on the positive things in my life, my relationship with Megan, my career, my friendships. I'm learning that it's okay to be happy even when there are unresolved issues with my family. It's a process, and I know there will be good days and bad days. But for the first time in a long while, I feel hopeful about the future.